A man stumbled out of the woods, eyes burned shut, whispering, "Don't look back." He was wearing a school uniform from a trip 17 years ago and hadn't aged a day. What happened next will shake you to your core. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The air that October morning was crisp with the bite of early fall, the kind that carried the faint scent of dying leaves and distant wood smoke. The students of Clearwater High's 10th grade U.S. history class filed onto the aging yellow school bus with the groggy ease of teenagers used to early mornings and mandatory excursions. Laughter spilled through the aisle, sneakers squeaked against vinyl, earbuds tangled like vines, and the buzz of adolescent boredom filled the space between their chatter. Cold Hollow Village, once a thriving logging outpost, was now a novelty destination. All rotting clapboard buildings, fake blood in antique bathtubs, and historically accurate mannequins posed in tortured tableaus. The class joked about ghost sightings and bored themselves trying to outdo one another's fake shrieks. But Mason Feller sat quietly near the middle of the bus, his knees drawn up, sketchpad balanced on his thighs. He wasn't laughing, not today. His pencil moved in tight, compulsive lines, forming another twisted rendering of a place he had never visited but could draw from memory. Gnarled trees, cabins half sunk into the earth, windowless silhouettes leaning impossibly forward. For weeks he'd been sketching these same bleak scenes, always with the sky inked black, even at noon, and shadows that didn't line up with any known sun. His eyes were hollow with insomnia. Mason hadn't slept more than a few hours in days. The night before, as his mother leaned in to kiss his forehead, he had gripped her wrist, a rare moment of physical contact. "Don't let them take us there," he'd whispered, the fear in his voice quiet but cold. "It's not a town. It's a trap." She had smiled gently, smoothing his hair, dismissing it as another bout of anxiety. Mason had always been sensitive, the word teachers used when they didn't want to say troubled, but she hadn't seen the bruises on his fingers from how tightly he'd clutched his pencil, or the pages he'd torn out and burned when the drawings got too real. The bus rolled westward, tires humming along a cracked two-lane road that twisted through towering evergreens. At 4:42 p.m., they passed the old sign, "Welcome to Cold Hollow. Population unknown." No one noticed the flicker in the sky above the trees, the static in the driver's radio, or the way the shadows suddenly stretched longer than they should. By 4:47, the GPS cut out. No one panicked. By 5:02, the bus was gone. The panic arrived slowly, like fog creeping down a hillside, not with a scream, but with a silence that no one could explain. When search helicopters finally descended on Cold Hollow that evening, all they found was the bus. It sat askew on the edge of a clearing, one front wheel half submerged in moss and rot. The driver's seat was empty. The keys dangled in the ignition, swaying gently as if recently moved. The emergency exit door hung open, its latch twisted, not broken, as though someone had used it deliberately. Inside, the seats bore faint impressions where bodies had been just hours earlier. Backpacks were tucked neatly beneath benches, half-eaten granola bars, cell phones, dead. No signs of panic, no blood, just absence. The forest was combed for miles in every direction. Dogs picked up nothing. Drones mapped every foot of terrain, or tried to. A strange static interference kept corrupting the drone feeds. Even the satellites weren't immune. NASA later released a statement citing a data retrieval anomaly. All footage from that time window showed only digital noise, black and green blocks swallowing the landscape like a virus. The investigation, at first, was massive. The FBI coordinated with state troopers, the National Guard, even private contractors. They mapped every road, checked every hospital, drained ponds. Cold Hollow itself, a 6-building shell of a town preserved for tourist dollars, was torn apart, brick by brick, floorboard by floorboard. Nothing. The media frenzy was instantaneous. The story led every nightly broadcast, flooded every social feed. The Cold Hollow disappearance, they called it. Talk shows interviewed grief-stricken parents. Conspiracy forums erupted with theories: alien abduction, government experiments, electromagnetic portals. It all felt like a fever dream, something too surreal to hold. Then came Curtis Dean, a freelance reporter known for chasing ghost stories and government cover-ups. Dean claimed he had found a woman, a former employee of the local ranger station, who'd seen something that day. He never named her. He promised to reveal everything in a live-streamed exposé. But the stream never happened. Curtis Dean was found dead in his garage, the cord from his microphone stand knotted tightly around his neck. The sheriff called it suicide. His neighbors said they heard shouting. One claimed she saw 2 men in suits enter his house that afternoon and leave without speaking. Her statement was never included in the official report. Lawsuits followed. So did silence. The school district settled quickly. The town council disbanded. Eventually, the news cycle moved on, but the forest stayed quiet. Too quiet. And Cold Hollow, a ghost town long before the field trip, faded into something worse. A place not forgotten, but deliberately unspoken. The morning of October 15th, 2025 began like any other in the rural outskirts of Tillamook County. Gray skies, damp pine needles underfoot, and a low mist curling across Route 7 like a sleeping thing. At precisely 5:03 a.m., just as the first light began bleeding through the trees, a driver named Susan Bell spotted what she initially thought was a deer staggering out of the woods ahead. She slowed, hand poised on the horn, but as the figure came closer, her foot hit the brake. It wasn't an animal. It was a man, or something shaped like one. He wore a navy blue uniform shirt with a faded patch stitched to the breast, Clearwater high. His khaki pants were torn, the hem shredded into ribbons. His feet were bare, cracked and bleeding, toes blackened with frost and earth. He moved as if gravity worked differently on him, swaying, listing, twitching with an unnatural rhythm, like a marionette whose strings had been half cut. His face was worse. Gauze, or what was once gauze, had been melted to his eyelids. The cloth fused with skin in a mess of blisters and ash. Where his eyes should have been, the flesh pulsed faintly, scarred over like wax that had melted and cooled again. He couldn't see, but he turned his head with eerie precision, as though something else guided him. His mouth was cracked, lips blistered, and when he finally spoke, it came as a dry rasp of vocal cords barely used. "Don't look back." Then he collapsed. The paramedics arrived within 12 minutes. By then, Susan had called in a code blue and the county sheriff. The man's pulse was erratic but present. His skin was cold to the touch, but his internal temperature was normal. They found no ID, no phone, no possessions. Only the school uniform with Monsieur Feller handwritten on the inside of the collar in faded marker. Blood work and DNA testing would later confirm it. The man was Mason Feller, age 32, legally declared dead in 2013, last seen alive at the age of 15 during the Cold Hollow field trip. Yet the man on the gurney had no wrinkles, no signs of aging. Dental records matched. So did old fingerprints from school enrollment files. He hadn't aged a single day. The hospital classified his condition as extreme trauma with ocular self-mutilation. But even the doctors couldn't explain the cellular preservation, or how his fingernails looked freshly clipped, or why, even under sedation, he whispered the same 3 words over and over again. "Don't look back. Don't The room at St. Bridget's was kept dim, not for comfort, but because Mason recoiled at light. Not just brightness, reflections. Any surface that shimmered was covered in surgical tape, paper sheets, or thick fabric. The window was blacked out entirely. A nurse explained he had suffered from ocular trauma so extensive the brain no longer trusted visual stimuli. But the truth felt heavier, stranger. Even in darkness, Mason flinched at things no one else could see. When he finally woke, 3 days after collapsing on Route 7, he didn't panic, didn't thrash. He simply turned his head toward the open door, as if waiting for someone. That someone came limping in moments later, Eloise Feller. Her body stooped now, hair drained of color, her hands trembling not from age but from the weight of 17 years spent begging time to rewind. She looked at her son as if trying to stitch the image into memory in case he disappeared again. Mason whispered her name only once and then fell silent. When he spoke again, it wasn't to her. "There were mirrors in the trees," he rasped, the words raw as though dragged from a throat long closed. "Not real ones. Skin. Shiny. Too shiny. Like they were waiting to be seen." Eloise grasped his hand, but he didn't return the pressure. He stared through the gauze, through the air, into something no one else could feel. "Time didn't work right there," he added. "It bent like glass in boiling water. It would stop. Loop. We'd forget, then remember, and forget again." She asked about the others. He winced. Mrs. Darnell was the first to scream, but she didn't stop, ever, even when she didn't have a mouth. He began to tremble then, a full-body shudder like a wave of cold electricity moving under his skin. "It wasn't a place," he said, slower now. "It was a thing, pretending to be a place, a hollow with hunger." The nurses sedated him within minutes. That night, the hospital was surrounded by unmarked cars. A federal team, silent, pale, dressed in black, relieved the local staff. The official report to the press was trauma-induced delusion. But the media knew better. Whispers leaked, forums lit up. An old mystery had come back clawing from the grave. Then, just as quickly, it vanished. The FBI issued a blackout order. Online articles were pulled, broadcasts scrubbed. Mason was transferred to a private facility whose name doesn't appear on any public registry. Everyone forgot, except one. Daniel Ortiz, now 32, had waited 17 years for this moment. His best friend had returned. And whatever Mason had brought with him, Daniel was willing to face it. St. Elora Recovery Center sat 3 hours outside Portland, wrapped in fog and funding so deep no one ever questioned its existence. It wasn't listed under state facilities or even private mental health registries. The front gate required biometric access and a physical key. Daniel Ortiz passed through both with calm precision. He carried a forged letter of authorization, stamped with a seal no one at reception recognized, but also didn't dare question. Trauma counselors, especially those with government clearance, had latitude few others did. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. It was too quiet. Not a sterile hospital silence, but a curated stillness, like someone had muffled the very concept of noise. Even the lights felt wrong, slightly dimmed, never flickering, never casting a shadow sharp enough to reflect. The air carried a faint chemical tang, like ammonia layered over something older, wetter. Room 23A had no glass in the door, no metal trim. The hinges were brass, the handle wrapped in cloth. When Daniel stepped inside, the temperature dropped by 10 degrees. He recognized Mason instantly, despite the 17-year gap, despite the gauze still wrapped tight around his eyes like a blind prophet who had seen too much. Mason sat cross-legged on the floor, back to the wall, sketchbook gripped like a lifeline. His fingers were stained charcoal black. The skin around his nails was raw, almost gnawed. He didn't lift his head when Daniel entered, but he stilled, like a needle locking onto signal. "You're late," Mason murmured. Daniel knelt beside him, slowly, carefully. They told me you'd stopped talking. Not to them, Mason replied. His voice was different, no longer adolescent, but brittle, worn down by something more corrosive than time. He opened the sketchbook without being asked. Daniel didn't mean to gasp, but he did. Each page bled with impossible geometry, trees curling inward, their roots coiled like fingers, cabins tilted at angles that couldn't exist in Euclidean space, and then the eyes, hidden inside bark grains, tucked beneath cloud wisps, nestled inside crescent moons, unblinking, sentient, watching through paper. They look back, Mason said flatly. Daniel swallowed, his own memories rising like bile. One summer night, age 10, brushing his teeth at a sleepover, glancing in the mirror. His reflection had blinked just before he did. He hadn't told anyone, except Mason, and Mason had said then in that same dry whisper, "They're watching who can't be watched." Now, all these years later, Mason turned his head toward him, blind but precise. "Did it ever happen again?" Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence between them was full, not with comfort, but recognition. The forest felt wrong before Daniel even crossed the threshold. He parked a mile from where the bus was found all those years ago, then walked the rest of the way, the pine needles crunching underfoot with a texture too soft, too deliberate, like stepping on lungs instead of earth. Cold Hollow didn't appear on GPS anymore, but Daniel didn't need coordinates. He had Mason's sketchbook. He followed the drawings as if they were maps. A gnarled tree with two trunks, a creek shaped like a spiral, the silhouette of a rotted chimney standing like a gravestone. He wore a chest-mounted GoPro. He carried nothing reflective, not even a phone. His clothes had been stripped of zippers, his boots dulled with ash. Every precaution Mason had hinted at, Daniel took. But it didn't matter. From the moment he crossed the threshold where the forest grew impossibly quiet, he knew he was being watched. Not seen. Watched. There was no rustle of wind, no animal calls. Even the air refused to move, as though the world itself held its breath. Then he found the clearing. There was no structure at first glance, but when he stepped 3 paces left and turned his head just slightly, it appeared, just as Mason had drawn it. The cabin stood squat and dark, windows like eyelids half lowered in suspicion. But it didn't sit in the clearing. It hovered through it, occupying some strange intersection between where it should be and where it wanted to be. When Daniel circled it, the roofline twisted, the porch elongated, the door stretched like pulled taffy. Every perspective contradicted the last. And still, he stepped forward. Inside was not inside. It was a corridor of trees, bark melting into floorboards, stars flickering overhead like blinking pupils. Time slipped. Seconds felt long. Minutes snapped short. He felt memory stutter. The GoPro's green light blinked violently. At 3:16 a.m., the signal went black. 7 days later, hikers found Daniel face down at the edge of the same clearing, shaking uncontrollably, eyes bound in fused gauze, wrists carved with something deeper than panic. 14 letters etched into his left forearm, trembling and ragged, as if his hand had fought itself to write them. They feed on attention. His lips were split, his mouth dry, but the final words he murmured before falling unconscious chilled the search party more than the blood on his skin. "Stop looking at them." The leaked audio was grainy, distorted at the edges, but unmistakably real. Uploaded to an anonymous server and downloaded over 600,000 times in the first 12 hours, it began with the hiss of static and the sterile clink of a recorder being set on a table. Then came the voice, dry, tremorous, but anchored by something grim and immovable. Mason Feller. "This is not a ghost story," he began. "This isn't about spirits or revenge or anything with rules. Cold Hollow isn't haunted. It's hungry." The room, judging by the background acoustics, was padded, secure, but the voice still wavered as if the walls themselves were listening. Mason spoke slowly, carefully, as though certain words might trigger something best left buried. "It's a mimic," he said. "It looks like a place, a town, a forest, a trail. But it isn't. It's a predator that learned how to wear reality like a costume. It pulls you in by making you look, by making you notice." He coughed, wet, hollow, and the chair creaked under him. "It feeds on attention, on thought, on belief. That's how it eats." He recounted, in fragmented detail, the final minutes before the field trip dissolved into horror. A shadow that flickered toward them, not away. The sensation that the forest was watching back. Students calling out to each other and hearing their voices echo before their mouths moved. And then Mrs. Darnell screaming, only it didn't stop. It looped, like a soundbite on repeat. Her mouth kept opening and closing long after her voice went silent. "It didn't want our bodies," Mason whispered. "It wanted our minds. Once we realized we were trapped, it deepened, became clearer, like focusing a lens. The more we understood, the more real it became." "Time shattered like glass," he said. "Hours curled in on themselves. Some students aged years in seconds, others reversed. The bus showed up and vanished on a loop. Memories collided. Reality rewrote itself mid-sentence." "The only way out was to forget," Mason said. "Forget what I saw. Forget me. I had to stop being a person, had to blind myself before it found me again through my own reflection." And that was the most damning part. The confirmation that the melted gauze fused to his eyes wasn't from an attack or accident. It was a choice. "I burned them shut," he confessed, "because I saw it seeing me." The recording ends with the sound of a single breath. Then silence. A decade has passed since the last known breach, and yet Cold Hollow remains silent, not abandoned, but contained. Twin fences now surround the entire 10-mile radius. The inner one wired with motion sensors and infrared drones, the outer lined with signs that read, "Danger, toxic contaminants, federal access only." Official documents label it as Site 103B, a remnant of Cold War chemical testing. No satellite imagery is available. Civilian aircraft are redirected mid-flight without explanation. Locals who once lived nearby have relocated, quietly bought out by faceless companies. The only sound left in that forest now is the wind, and some say even that stopped sounding natural. Mason Feller lives in a government-owned farmhouse nestled between wheat fields in northern Washington, surrounded by miles of nothing. He has no phone, no internet, no mirrors. The windows are always covered. Delivery workers are instructed not to make eye contact. Inside, he paints. Every wall of his home is covered in canvases, jagged spirals, blackened woods, bent perspectives, and pale shapes with mouths where eyes should be. None of his work has pupils. None ever will. He hasn't spoken in public since the interview leaked. And though his physical scars have faded slightly, he wears a cloth bandage over his eyes, tied with deliberate precision each morning, even when alone. Daniel Ortiz lives in a secured psychiatric unit that doesn't advertise its existence. He no longer responds to voices, not even to his name. But at night, attendants sometimes find him carving circles into his bedsheets with his fingernails, whispering fragmented phrases. They bend light. They bend thought. They bend you. His eyes remain bandaged as well, though the gauze is more ceremonial now than medical. He hasn't spoken since he was recovered. Still, stories linger. Sometimes campers near the restricted perimeter hear strange noises echoing from beyond the trees. Footsteps pacing on old wood, a faint engine rumbling in the dark. And once in a while, rare but consistent, someone catches their reflection behaving just slightly off. A blink too late. A mouth twitch that doesn't match. Those who see it don't always notice, but those who do never forget. On the morning of October 15th, traffic cameras near the old county road often glitch for exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds. Electrical interference spikes. The forest goes utterly still. And if you listen closely, really listen, you might hear wheels on gravel, and a voice, thin and broken, leaking through the trees. Don't look back.